All right, let's dive in. In these meetings, my goal is always to look at the most current information and try to get you any updates that we've learned over the past couple of months. Make sure that we're updates um, are pertinent and things you need. So there's not a ton this month that's new. We're finally getting into the actual time frame where the refrigerants changing at the manufacturing level, but we're not seeing too much in the way of regulations. I think with Washington changing over right now, we're in a little bit of a standstill on some of the programs. So um, which is good news. We didn't need a lot more change right now, but we'll walk through what we have. And I would ask that anybody who has questions, pop them into the chat or just turn your mic off and ask me a question. Feel free. We got a small group, so it will not should not get unruly. But thank you all for joining, and we'll dive in now. So, four basic topics: utility update, Inflation Reduction Act, changes to the CEE, and A2L updates. And again, some of this is repetitive from last couple of months, but it never hurts to go over it again because there's so many details we need to be aware of. The utility updates haven't changed much. The one thing I would continue to remind everybody on the call, both Republic employees and contractor partners, that they're not going away. They're going to be there for a while. And if you don't use them, you put yourself at a serious disadvantage. So continue to encourage customers to take a look at the products that qualify if you're a contractor, and as a Republic employee, continue to help contractors do what's necessary to take advantage of the tools. We will continue to see them. The utilities, from everything I can see, have plenty of money to be putting into these, and that doesn't seem to be changing in our part of the world. As you get further south, the rebates are not there. But in our part of the world, there's still a lot of pressure to get products shifting to heat pumps and using the utility rebates to do so. So if you need some support, need to understand how to do things on our system and need our help with it, just ask your TM and we'll help out. As I said, we're in the middle of the switch from the Republicans or the Democrats to the Republicans in Washington. And that generally means some change. And the files, the programs on the left are what we know are pretty much certain. The low GWP refrigerants aren't going away. The Inflation Reduction Act is pretty much here to stay. It may change a little bit, but it's going to be here for a while. DOE efficiencies look to be changing on the commercial side, 1129. DOE on furnaces, there's going to be some court cases that decide how this finally looks and when it finally goes into effect. But as of right now, all furnaces will need to be 95% efficient on December 18th, 2028. Again, that creates some hardship in some parts of the world and in our territories, but we'll watch it carefully. I talk a little bit later on in this presentation about PFAS regulations. Those are the forever chemicals. Not a big thing in our part of the world, but it's good to be on top of it in case consumers are asking, and we'll talk more about that. Plastic bans and Energy Star, most efficient in CE, continue to be a challenge. What's still up in the air, and we just don't know what's going to happen. Ultra low GWP, there was initial talk about 2029. This probably gets even more messy going into the next 5 years or so. Reason being is the states that aren't going to get what they want based on the Republican administration are probably going to get very aggressive in doing their own thing, which creates extra cost in the industry and extra challenges for the industry and the manufacturers. So we'll watch that carefully and continue to tell you what we see. But for right now, it's probably going to get messy. DOE residential efficiency standards, it's going to change. You're going to start seeing these new words. SCORE and SURE are the new metrics to replace SEER2, EAR2, HSPF2. Those are seasonal cooling off mode rating efficiency and seasonal heating off mode rating efficiency. Puts a lot more smarts into the rating sessions and gives homeowners a much better understanding of how the systems are going to operate. But as of right now, it's going to be into 2030 before we see that. So shouldn't be something we need to worry about for a while. Ultra low NOx furnaces, not a big deal in our part of the world. Electrification, still going to be a factor. We're still going to have that force, albeit shifting a little bit with the new legislature or the new leadership. And DOE controls, um, certainly a factor you're going to hear more about in the next 6 months, and what happens with fans and blowers and what goes on there. And then finally, Energy Star, the new tier. So a lot of stuff up in the air that will continue to happen, and we need to keep our eyes on that. Inflation Reduction Act, there's a new tool out there that I want to make sure everyone's aware of. Hardy put it together, and it's the Hardy IRA Toolkit. Inflation Reduction Act. And this is by far the best tool I've seen from the industry on the Inflation Reduction Act. Couple of different paths you can go here. First one I want to talk about is the toolkit or the course. And if you click on this particular tab, and this is a live link, if you do get the PDF, you can use this link to go right to this site. And if you don't, you can put in Hardy IRA Toolkit and it'll take you there. But you can see this really walks through the residential tax credits. It walks through the homes program, the rebates, and the HERE program, which is the basically whole home efficiency program. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But it walks through that, gives you a lot of education on how these pieces work. And it's a good resource, and you can send your teams to it so they can get educated as well. So one of the better sites I've seen on this. The maps actually walk through the HERE and the homes program. The HERE is the rebate program we've talked most about because it's the most applicable. And we're watching it carefully. It's not available yet in Illinois or Iowa, and we'll walk through that map in a minute. But it is going to be available soon in Wisconsin, from what we can tell. The Homes Act is a little different. That is the whole home energy savings on retrofits. So you have to have a modeling program. You have to put a lot of pieces together. Some states are getting this into place. Wisconsin has it in place now, but it's based on a previous program that's been slightly tweaked to fit. Lots of dollars available, but it's probably not going to happen in Illinois and Iowa for quite a while. So as far as the HERE map, this is the rebate program up to $8,000 on a heat pump system. Wisconsin has been approved, but they have no definition of how you're supposed to do your paperwork and get it in place. Both Iowa and Illinois have not been approved yet. Illinois has applied and put their submission in. Iowa has not. So no news there. That hasn't changed for a long time. We expected Illinois to be out with a program sometime before the end of 2024, but it just didn't happen. So no news, don't know where it's going, but we'll keep you posted. The homes map, this is again the whole home rebate when you're doing the analysis and the programming. It's much more limited, only 4 states, if you count Washington, D.C., are using the program today. More to follow, but it's taking a much longer time in most states because it's so complex to put the program together. Again, I don't see it being a big factor in our part of the world, most likely. Did want to make sure everybody knows for the tax credits, we use CEE, the Consortium for Energy Efficiency. They define the levels at which we have to meet to get the tax credit. Those rates changed as of January 1, 2025. Used to be we were in these ranges with 10 EER, 15.2 SEER2 for a ducted heat pump. Now we go to a ducted heat pump and we're 9.8. EER2 with the 16, but the capacity ratio is what we're following now. You have 2 paths you can get to the efficiency standard. Easiest way to do it is just keep getting the matches from us and we'll help you out with it as we go. To take advantage of the tax credit, always say this disclaimer, I'm not the tax guy, but I do want to make sure everybody understands that we always recommend you push your customers to a tax professional to get their feedback. But I do like to make sure everybody knows that we're talking about tax liability, not tax owed. Those are two different things. Tax owed is after withholding. So in this particular case, the homeowner owed 4,332 is their tax liability. They had a tax credit because they bought a heat pump and a furnace of $2,600. That reduced their tax liability by 1,732. They had done withholding of 4,000. So had they not done the tax credit, they would still owe $332 because they did get the tax credit. They're now getting $2,268 back. Many people have told me that I can't get a tax credit because I get no refund. Has nothing to do with that. It's all about your tax liability. So make sure that your teams understand that. Steps for contractors. Make sure you're selling 25C eligible systems based on the new standards. Always explain to homeowners that it could reduce your taxes if you do pay taxes, and only you and your tax professional will be able to know for sure what your tax credit will do based on your tax situation. I like to have a card for a local tax professional when I'm in with the homeowner. So if they don't know somebody, you give them a reference point so they can take advantage. Also make sure your 25C standard, AFUE, SEER 2, HSPF 2 ratings and AHRI numbers are on your invoices. So when they do go to claim, they're going to have that information handy. You got questions? Ask your TMs. Okay, don't see any questions coming through, but if you have any, please let me know. A little bit on A2Ls. Highly recommend Steve Goodenough's A2L Basics course. It's a great overview for your technicians. Another really good one is the ACCA online training. It's not terribly expensive. It's 5 different segments, 20 minutes each. I did pass it, so it can be done. But it's a good overview if you have people who still don't understand the basics of A2Ls. I leave this slide in here more as a reference point. There's a whole lot of terminology and a whole lot of acronyms that it's very hard to keep track of. And I'm not going to read through these today, but know that it's here. And if you hear somebody talking about an HFO or a CARB, this is where you can go to get those acronyms and understand what they mean. Again, just like to remind people that ozone depletion is the challenge we were solving way back when we got rid of 22 and 12 and went to 410A. When we added 410A, we did solve the ozone depletion problem. The ozone's pretty healthy now, which is great. But we added 410A, which was a pretty high GWP gas, which is added to that problem. So now we're looking to reduce the global warming potential. That's why GWP, or global warming potential, is so important now, because we're looking to reduce the amount of global warming potential of a gas. We're doing that in 3 ways. First way is the bulk phase down and allocations of global warming gases. And basically the federal government said, hey, as of 2022, we were making so much of these global warming gases, and we're going to start to phase them down. First hop was 10%. The next hop was 30. We got another hop in 2027 for, 2029 for another 30%, but we level off at 15%. So 15% of what we were making in 2022 is what they'll be making for the foreseeable future after 2036. As of right now, they kind of overshot. Looks like we have more. We were producing more. There was buildup happening, and the government really didn't catch that. So that's why the price of 410 hasn't gone down yet. But as these phase downs take effect, we'll start to see that. The next step happened January 1, 2025, and that is no longer allowing manufacturers to make products that use global warming potential, high global warming potential gases like 410A. And for residential, um, like commercial chillers, that was all January 1. The VRF number actually has moved to 2027. They've given an extra year due to the complexity there. So January 1, 2027. Refrigerant management and claiming has been solved now. There's no new licensing requirements, but there's new standards by which those things will happen. But it's not until 2028, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on it. Some of those things, including is we were looking at whether or not disposable cylinders were going to go away. We've fought that, and it's going to stay as it is. Refrigerant reclaiming refrigerant mandate will happen 1/1/29. So as we get closer to that, we'll get more information. And then automatic leak detection is one of the pieces going forward on bigger commercial systems. So more to come on that as well. Again, we are in the A2L world. That means low toxicity and lower flammability. It is flammable, and I never want anyone to hear me say or infer from what I say that it is not flammable. It is, but it's low flammability, but it is not toxic. When we get into the B refrigerants, that's where we get into toxicity and problems with breathing those that can damage the lungs immediately. The A2Ls and even the A1 refrigerants can still suffocate you because it forces the oxygen out of the air, but it is not toxic to your lungs to breathe it. That's where the A and the B come in. As you can see, 454B is a combination of R32 and R1234YF. If you've seen the R1234YF, that's what we're using in most automobiles today, and it has a very, very low GWP number. In fact, here's the GWP numbers of all the popular refrigerants now, and the GWP number basically represents what's the equivalent of a single carbon atom in the atmosphere. So with 410A, one molecule of R410A is the equivalent of 2,088 molecules of carbon because of the amount of time it spends in the atmosphere. That's where the real pain of this comes in, is it just doesn't cycle through and get out of the atmosphere because it doesn't bond with anything and move through the atmosphere. Whereas R54B is 4.9 years, R32 is 5, and 1234 YF is 0.05 years. So it's about 2 weeks in the atmosphere. So that really reduces the amount of global warming potential when it's not in the atmosphere. Okay. I wanted to go through this one again because I think it's important to get to know these terms. As we talk about flammability and homeowners share their concerns with you that I don't want that new flammable refrigerant, we need to talk about what that really means and what is low flammability. And there's a couple different terms here, and low flammability limit is the concentration of refrigerant you need to actually have flame take off. So with the propane, you only need a concentration of 38 grams per meter squared. So a meter squared is basically 3 foot by 3 foot by 3 foot. So think of a cube with 38 grams of propane in it. That's enough to light it and to cause a problem. Whereas our new refrigerant 454B, you have to have almost 3 times or 10 times that much to have flammability take place. The minimum ignition energy, somewhere between 100 and 300 millijoules is what you need for a the Optim or 454B, whereas something much smaller for propane, 0.25 millijoules. 100 millijoules is the equivalent of a spark plug in a car. So that's the type of energy you're going to need to get a spark to happen, whereas propane is a much, much smaller number. So somebody have a question? Okay. Burning velocity, that's how fast the flame goes from one place to another. Again, with propane, you've heard that whoosh in your grill. That means it's lighting pretty fast. With 454B, it would move very slowly, which really prevents it from catching anything else on fire. And finally, heat of combustion. There's a lot less heat in the fire of a 454B flame. So they're much less likely to catch other things on fire. So all of the major factors we use to measure flammability are much lower for 454B. So not only does it um, take a lot more energy to get it lit, it really doesn't have a lot of energy once it is lit and doesn't have a chance to catch other things on fire. I think by now most everyone's seen this picture. The class 1 or the 410A is that first box in the top left. Um, and you can see when we light it, it fills that full opening of the angle there, and 2Ls, A2Ls really just proceed past that a little bit, whereas propane on the bottom fills it up completely. So a very different amount of flame happening with those. So what's that mean for us? That means in most cases, we're going to need refrigerant sensors in our systems. A couple other things, follow new flame standards, which we're slowly learning about in the industry, getting more information on what we're going to have to do. Need to make sure we have the right tools that aren't sparking in the area. And first responder training needs to cover these new products, which is starting to happen now too. The other thing that's happening is building codes. And although the building codes have been updated to allow for A2Ls, they're really not incorporating everything we need to know and aren't necessarily as clear as we would like them to be. Um, the In Iowa and in Illinois as well, the 15.2 ASHRAE standard for residential applications is kind of the driver, and it's a very complicated document. This is the formula that defines how we have to calculate when we need um, um, a sensor and when we don't. And that's all the details on what it is. Now, I have an engineering background, and this formula scares me a little bit. So I can imagine the average installer is not going to be doing this formula. So it does make it a little tough. The main thing we need to be concerned about is refrigerant concentration. And even with 410A, we had suffocation risk. It didn't come up much because we didn't really worry about that type of concentration in a traditional home. But now that fire is involved, we need to look at it a little more carefully. And what we need to think about is this home is approximately 800 square feet total, but this bedroom's about 130. And the important piece of that is refrigerant detection systems will needed if you don't have a refrigerant detection system, you have to use the whole square foot. If you do have one, then you have to use the smallest space. Let me restate that. If you don't have a detection system, you need to use the whole square footage of the home, all 800 square feet. If you do, or if you don't have one, then you have to use the smallest space that's got a vent in it. So if all that air would leak into that bedroom, then we have a problem. So that smallest floor area. And the difference is in that one bedroom, we'd be able to have a system that has approximately 4.3 pounds of refrigerant. If we didn't have a refrigerant detection, that would limit us because 4.3 is not going to cover that house. If we did have one, we could have up to 27 pounds of refrigerant. And there's not a system in the world for that type of home that's going to take that much refrigerant. So gives you a sense of the scale. The ASHRAE 15.2 requires a detection system to have these 5 things. A, system must be tested in installation. When refrigerant is detected, the system must energize the blower for circulation, activate required mechanical ventilation for sufficient runtime, open zoning dampers, and de-energize electric duct heaters. All makes perfect sense. And for the most part, those things are happening with the systems designed by the manufacturers. The only one that's a little bit uncertain is the mechanical ventilation. And it all depends on how your local code is going to be interpreted. And we strongly recommend talking to your inspectors to understand how they're going to interpret that and what they're going to require from you, because you don't want to find out after the fact. You want to design your systems according to how they'll be inspecting them. When you're replacing a system, the manufacturer's instructions tell you clearly where the sensors need to go. If they're not already installed in the coil or the air handler, it will tell you where they need to go and how they need to be installed. And then the other thing that's very important is the testing itself. Refrigerant detection shall be tested for proper operation after installation in accordance with the manufacturer installation instructions. We kind of recommend that this is something you need to note in your install process. So if you have a service software, recording it there, so you have record of it. So if there is ever a fire and they try to pin it on the HVAC system, you can prove that that testing was done. So, ACA recommends this checklist, and I think it's a good place to start. Does the system have a leak detection system? Will the fan run continuously or just when there's a call for heat? Is it ducted or ductless? Does the outdoor have one or multiple indoor units? We'll talk about that in a minute. Does the system have shutoff valves? Probably more commercial application, but good to know. And then can continuous ventilation be added to the system? Always a good fix for this particular problem. When we have uh, multi splits, so one outdoor, multiple indoor, then we have the chance of that refrigerant going all into one space. So the rules change a little bit, and it's important to read that installation manual very carefully on how the different ductless manufacturers recommend you manage that. From the JCI side of the thing, we have a calculator that helps you determine the need for that um, refrigerant detection system. And if you don't have it yet on your phone, for Apple or Android, you can click on the QR code right here, or shoot it and load it onto your phone and start experimenting with it if you haven't yet. Learn how it works and be ready to use it and have that documentation. It creates a very nice report that you can add to your proposal. And again, sometimes it's just doing what your competition isn't doing to put you slightly ahead. So sharing that report and saying, here's the important factors for refrigerant detection and why we are recommending a system that has one. So good tool. In preparation for your installs, the ACC A2L online training or the Steve Goodenough training, certainly start working on those if you haven't done so already for your team. Make sure your tools are updated and ready for the new refrigerant in terms of sparking and in terms of having the right connections for the new refrigerant tanks. They are going to be left-hand thread, so it'll be a little confusing at first, but it will keep us from putting the wrong gauges on the tanks. Definitely train on the brands of leak detection system for all the brands you install. Incorporate some checklists to make sure that you're looking at these systems. Figure out a plan on how you're going to manage testing, and then think about ventilation. I would recommend somebody in your team understanding what ASHRAE 15.2 says, or if your local inspector is more clear and has better information, then have some time with them and get some information. I would learn and use the DS Solutions app and that RDS calculation too, especially on the commercial side where it gets a little more confusing. And probably most important is talk to your AWJ. And what's an AWJ? That's an authority with jurisdiction. That's your inspector. That's the local codes. That's how people are going to interpret this because it's not clear. And inspectors have always been a challenge in terms of knowing how they're going to look at a particular system. It's more confusing than ever. And there's a lot of ways you can interpret this stuff. So I would start having those conversations as soon as possible with whoever it is that gets to say this is a good installation or this is not in your area. And that could be multiple people for those of you who work in several different small towns. But have those conversations and understand how that inspector is going to interpret because you want to be within that code and make sure you're not having to go back and redo things and create potential risk in case of a fire. Reminder, the tanks aren't going to need to be standing upright. They will have the ability to burp out some of the excess pressure if the tank heats up and forces some gas out, but they will need to be turned upright. So some coaching for your teams to make sure you don't turn those refrigerant tanks downward, because that would then burp liquid onto the floor of the tank, which could create a potential problem. So, but no placards are going to be needed, no ventilation required. It's not as scary as some of the folks initially stated. I talked about the forever chemicals, the PFAS, and they're polyfluoroalkyls. And we've been making them in this country, around the world, for since the 40s. Around World War II, we started making them. And they just don't break down. Some of them will stay in the market for, or stay in the atmosphere for 1,500 years. And they get into our bodies and they cause some cancer issues and some other problems. And it's become an issue for our side because some of our HFCs, like 454B, have some of these forever chemicals, the PFASs in them. But it's different because the the chemicals we're talking about in 454B have a atmospheric lifetime of 10 or 15 years, not 1,500. So some of the states are starting to put laws in place to say you can't have these, and they're being uh, a little unclear about which can and which you can't. I bring it up only because I want you to be aware if a homeowner asks the question. As of right now, none of the Midwestern states are in the mix. It's only the Northeast and California, Washington, Oregon who are leading this charge. But it does sometimes leak into this part of the world from a consumer perspective. No legislation is happening, but some consumers are starting to ask questions. So I wanted to be sure that you knew that in reality, 454B and R32 aren't really factors in this. And we don't expect to see any legislation, even in those other states. But if you have a customer who's concerned, you can fill them in. As far as the transition goes, we still have that final piece to the far um, right of components and a couple different pieces. I want to make sure everyone knows that anything with 410A in it that was built before January 1 can still be installed. That's not a problem. It can be installed until January 1st, 2026. So we've got plenty of time to get that installed. And as far as Republic goes, we're going to be out of most everything that would meet that category sometime this summer at the latest. So it shouldn't be a factor carrying that over into next year. But there still is the component factor for replacing a unit with 410A. And there is from the EPA, there is a path to do that. And we're still wrestling with how DOE is going to interpret the efficiency standards and how we calculate that, because it could go on an older coil that doesn't have a match. And the DOE is not happy with that. So more to come. As of right now, we don't have all the answers, but we'll keep you posted. Additional resources. If you need more information, again, we'll be back here a month from, well, not a month from today, but in February, and we'll go through this all again and update you on anything new. But the IRA toolkit, there's the address to find it. Very good tool if you're worried about anything with the IRA or the tax credits. It's all right there. 454B white papers from York, Luxair, good way to get information. The EPA Data Hub. If you want some massive data on what's happening with refrigerant around the country, the EPA Data Hub will help you there. If you're looking for more on A2Ls, a couple of videos that would be good for homeowners, those are on the Luxair and York sites to get some more information. Next meeting will be going February of and I think I may have the wrong, no, February 8th, 2025 should be. We'll be doing this again. This one will be recorded. We'll send out the link to the recording so you can share it with your team. We also will send the PDF so you can click on any links or print out and use these to share with your team. So with that, I absolutely will take any questions. If you have any, you can unmute your phone and take any questions, or I don't see anything in the chat, but while I'm waiting for that, thank you all for joining and Happy New Year. Appreciate all your time and effort in being here with us, and we'll do it again in about 30 days. Thanks all.